Hi Graham, good morning and welcome to our Devico Breakfast Bar. This is our series of conversations with CTOs and entrepreneurs, and we're delighted to have you here today. I guess before we kick off, it would be great if you could tell us a bit about your role, your organisation and what's happening in there at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So Rvvup is a new payments company. It was founded by David Nunn, who was ex-Braintree PayPal company. My introduction to David was through a CTO network in London. They were looking for someone with a lot of experience working on APIs and integrations. I started speaking to them around 2021, before the company was actually going properly. We got everything moving by about April time and started ramping up pretty quickly, like expanding out the team over that first year. We managed to raise a reasonable amount of finance in that first year to help us kind of expand quite quickly. My initial plan was to take on a smaller team of more senior people initially to get the first proof of concepts out the door, and then start to expand out as we needed to cover more ground more quickly. My own background, I come from back-end development. A long time actually at this stage, over 20 years of sort of Java, Python, DevOps development. I'd worked as an interim CTO for a few years prior to this, and now this first kind of full-time CTO role that I've done.
So it's a very interesting and I guess varied background that kind of brings you to where you are today. I had a look at your website actually, and I was intrigued, particularly in the FinTech space, which is quite a competitive market space. And at one point I thought, wow, quite a crowded market space around your proposition. But could you tell us a little bit more, deep dive around your organisation, what you're currently working on, your product, and the kind of key problems it's trying to solve?
Yeah, sure. The key problem we're trying to solve is giving merchants more options in terms of payment methods to help them convert. That's ultimately the goal. We're getting to a point now where the consumers coming along with kind of expectations of different payment methods that they want on sites. They almost come with their preferred methods or the certain brands that they recognize that they want to use. Our original plan was to focus on the older payment methods like credit cards, first of all, then newer methods like buy now, pay later schemes, which exploded during the pandemic, and also support newer APIs like the Open Banking API, which now brings banking into the payment fold. But also look forward at what mechanisms may come up in the future, like crypto and central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. We're initially targeting kind of small to medium enterprises who probably don't have their own development department or maybe have a relationship with a development agency. So we want to give them one integration and let them try different payment methods. Because our thesis is that for a long time we've only had a few payment rails, like the main credit card payment rails. Banking has never really been a payment option because the process of adding in account details is quite a clunky experience for anybody. And also that kind of push method doesn't really work very well in an e-commerce environment. Our expectation is that there'll be more methods, like we'll have more providers doing BNPL. All the banks will be doing open banking, but they do it to different levels. It's meant to be a standard API. It's not always implemented the same way. And we actually expect there'll be more innovation from the banks themselves in terms of APIs, which probably won't be part of the open banking spec. It just makes it, whereas it's been quite a stable landscape for a long time, it actually probably will fragment more in future as more competitors start coming into this and the banks start pushing much more to use them as a trusted payment option with biometrics and everything else, rather than the old credit card schemes with 3DS and like, which has never been a very comfortable e-commerce experience.
Okay, very interesting. I was thinking more broadly as well about FinTech and the industry. What areas of FinTech are you particularly passionate about? What do you find intriguing at the moment?
More generally in FinTech, I mean, the big problems for us right now, it's very hard to start in FinTech because of the amount of regulation compared to other industries. So this is my first pure FinTech experience. And the one thing we have to get right out of the ground is security, privacy, before you do anything. We have to spend quite a lot of time going through security questionnaires with our vendors, trying to achieve different compliance standards. Like we're pushing very hard for ISO 27001 right now. Cyber Essentials Plus we've been through recently, which at a time was a checkbox. Now it's actually a reasonable amount of work to get through. So that's actually one area where hopefully we'll start seeing a lot more innovation with AI. A lot of the problems there actually is checking what you have, like automatically scanning your current infrastructure and landscape, but also when it comes to doing background checks on companies like KYC, KYB, anti-money laundering checks, That's one area that is still quite a tricky thing, quite a tricky area to work in. I'm hoping with the sort of advance in AI, some of the examples there were around fraud in particular, that we'll start seeing some big jumps in the next year or so, which will make it a lot easier. It's been quite a tough experience getting our product to standard and getting through a lot of these processes.
Okay. And I think you've alluded to it a couple of times when you were saying there about innovation and AI in FinTech. But is there a headline statement for you around what you might see as the future of FinTech as we go into the kind of next 5 years?
Yeah, I'd imagine a lot more of this will become sort of automated with AI. There's quite a lot of the kind of support side of fintechs, which can cause a huge amount of frustration for customers, for merchants. Like we've all had experiences, been on hold with banks and that for a long time. It's in the bank's interest to let people self-serve, and AI can take that, it can jump that whole experience on massively. Up until now, it's been, having worked in sort of big organizations previously, lots of these processes are backed by manual swivel chair or kind of green screen processes. Now we've capacity to build that tooling much more quickly with a better user experience. So hopefully users will be able to self-serve and get answers more quickly to the problems they're having. Sometimes in fintech especially, you have to be almost deliberately opaque around when you're trying to deal with why you're not allowing somebody to do something. You don't want to give them the information why. In fact, it's part of our compliance, we're not allowed to. But there are many cases where we can and should give them more information, let them know like why things are happening, or just explain to them, just remove that frustration of why fees have been assessed in a particular way, or why funds have had to be paused for a period of time.
Okay. Thank you. Really interesting context around the landscape that we're operating in. I think if we come back into your organisation and be a bit more specific around some of the challenges or obstacles that you face in your role in trying to achieve your goals.
I mean, the biggest thing starting a payments company in 2021 is just the table stakes are fairly high these days. There's just a lot you need to get out of the ground. I touched on the compliance side and just how you need to build a platform up. But also when you're competing with some of the big players in this market, there's just a lot of ground you have to cover before you become a viable option to to merchants. In the past, some competitors have really pushed on having a very strong developer experience. So developers can just quickly get up and test and validate that a solution is viable for them. I think now that's kind of moved on into support. Now, it's table stakes to have the developer experience, but now you need to have that next level of support experience. And that's where, again, AI comes into it. Like, how can you answer questions for people when they are having problems? You can write as many API docs and guides as you can, but people will always find another question to ask, another view on the same information. And that's where AI, just with some of the new LLMs, will have the ability to hopefully translate our documentation, explain our documentation more easily to people.
Yeah, I mean, even with the advance of AI, and people talk about that replacing roles and not needing as much talent, but I still think we're faced very much with a talent scarcity issue within many sectors, but particularly in yours. I just wondered what your thoughts are around the potential shortage of qualified experts in the space.
Yeah, it's an ongoing problem and will be a problem for quite a long time. For me, AI doesn't threaten those roles. We see it as a productivity enhancement that now people will be able to do more with the same people. Like I do a reasonable bit with AI tools, writing code, not on a critical path anymore, but like on internal tooling and stuff. And my go-to now would be to go to ChatGPT. We use Copilot internally as well. It's nowhere near a point yet where you can just kind of define in prompts what you want something to do. You still get code back that is invalid. You need developers to be able to understand it. Actually, having that experience, be able to do like a decent code review, because I think you need to see these tools as being almost like a junior coder right now. You can't trust what they're giving you, so you have to be able to understand what's happening and validate it and change it and explain to it why it was wrong. But for mid-level or senior developers, it's an amazing boost to just be able to explain quickly what you want, get something back pretty much as you want it, and if you need to do some modifications, you can also see where it's potentially going wrong. So now there are tasks that we probably wouldn't have prioritized previously that may have taken maybe a couple of days, it wasn't important enough to do. But when those things become like maybe a couple of hours work or most of the morning's work, all of a sudden we can do these things and add in these features that we ordinarily would have passed on. So yeah, I don't see it as being a threat. I just think what will happen is that now we'll be able to do more. There'll be greater expectation to do more. We'll be able to expand out much more quickly than we had previously. So I think starting a company now, I think it's almost going to be two generations. It's like going to be everything before AI and everything after AI. After AI, just companies will be able to get to achieve those table stakes much more quickly than previously, which again should lead to a sort of an explosion in companies because the hurdles to getting started are lower than they were.
Okay. So it strikes me that you're saying that people still play a really important part in our capability model. How are you finding the market with regards to accessing that talent and those skills?
It's always tricky. I mean, we started in 2021, and through that year into probably halfway through 2022, it was incredibly difficult to hire for a startup. We're competing with much bigger brands that people always want brands on the CVs ultimately. It's nice to work for a big brand, and as soon as you say it, people recognise what you do. And it was a very tricky market to get going in, and that's where working with Devico was really helpful to us to be able to tap into their pool of talent very quickly and get up and running. When you hear about the kind of headline layoffs in tech, when you've been through this, actually, that doesn't really match what's happening in reality. That can be just a company letting go of a bunch of contractors, or sometimes the people who let go aren't their top performers anyway. So it's not like suddenly a whole slew of red hot talent on the market. So it's not necessarily getting easier to hire good people. Like I said, early on, we're focusing on more senior people rather than junior people, because that way we can just get more quickly. I forgot to mention that we're remote only. So we don't have an office. We don't even meet in real life that often. So we need people who communicate well and can just almost self-start and self-motivate. So we can give them requirements and they know pretty much what to do. That we're not having to do a lot of explanation on the domain and the technology. But being able to work with Devico just means we can get people at that level in more quickly. The guys have a really good book of developers that we can tap into.
Thank you. And I'd like to come back to kind of working with Devico a bit later on, but you've kind of, I guess, led us into that conversation around IT outsourcing and partnering. And I know a lot of our listeners are kind of interested in that as a proposition, but often anxious sometimes about the best way to proceed. I just wonder how much of a role you believe an IT outsourcing partner can play and must play in helping businesses achieve their goals.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the company, obviously, and what part software plays in that company. For us, we're a software company. It's all about creating software products. So it's really important that we internally have a really strong grasp of how everything works. And that's why, again, with the way we hire, it's with a view to being able to use outsourced companies to be able to do other pieces that are maybe off the critical path for us. There's some functions that just aren't core that we don't do internally. We use SaaS tools a lot. Like, we don't run our own build servers. Obviously, there's quite a lot of things in the past that we would have self-hosted, especially on the developer tool chain, and all that stuff we try and offload. So we're not kind of wasting time on that, and we're focusing on the infrastructure and application code that we really need. Because we're remote, it almost doesn't make any difference to us whether it's someone through Devico or someone that we're employing directly. We're all remote. So it's a matter of trying to get the right person to fit into our organization, rather than just thinking of, I need like 20 bums on seats from this project, and like just assigning a budget to that and forgetting about it. Like, we're very closely involved, and the developers that come in are very closely involved with everything that we do. I think they join our dailies. We see it very much as an extension of our team, rather than just kind of hiving off a piece of functionality that we're not interested in developing on our main roadmap. For us, it's kind of different. Maybe not everybody's in the same experience. Sometimes some bigger companies will have that, where they just need volume of people to get through stuff, and you can offload a whole section of work with, say, a PM on top, and the different roles, like from front end, back end, QA, in one go. But our model is very tech focused. It really is about us understanding the tech and owning that and bringing people into it rather than giving it away to them.
Yeah. Well, what would you say are some of the risks to manage with regards to working with an outsourced partner?
I guess the first risk for us is just dealing with things like compliance and data security. When we take on people internally, we provide devices and everything else and deal with security that way. We have to develop different policies to be able to work with external vendors and be very careful about how we allow them to work on the source code and commit to the code base. We do allow people to work on their own hardware, but we should be very careful on what we accept back in. That's always a risk on the security side for us, that giving it out to people who are just slightly outside the organization. We do try and treat people like they're internal rather than external. We don't have that kind of mentality that people just see us as, this is a job I'm doing for 3 months or 6 months, and leave that code base sat on my laptop now for the next 3 years. We need them to take our security seriously. So it's always a vulnerability when you're not providing the hardware, where you can just take that stuff back from them in the end. Apart from that, though, there's always a risk in the remote model taking on anybody, because people can interview very differently to how they'll perform day to day. positively and negatively. Some people come across very well and then not work out very well. Whereas actually the reverse is more often true, that people don't interview well. They struggle maybe with code sharing that during an interview process, which we have to do when we're working remotely, but could be great employees later. So there's potential we pass on good people. But again, for us, that's not actually that different to how we resource normally.
Okay, thank you. I just wonder if you could give us some insight into the kind of decision-making process that you went through as a business to decide to engage with an outsourcing company. And what were the kind of steps you went through to make sure you chose the right partner?
Yeah, so there's certain things that we need to do. Like we provide plugins to e-commerce systems, for example. As part of our go-to-market strategy, the plan is to focus on smaller to medium-sized companies early on. And mainly because if you focus on a really big consumer or merchant early on, you can kind of get dragged into just fulfilling their roadmap rather than yours. So we're keen. We wanted to get some time working with smaller companies where we could define the process that we want and make sure the features that we're working on apply more generally rather than to a specific use case of a big merchant. That's fine for getting out of the ground, but the next thing then is we do need breadth of coverage across different payment methods in different geographies, and also different geos will have more popular e-commerce systems. So we need to be able to react to like how the consumer wants to pay and what e-commerce systems the merchants have. But some of that stuff isn't necessarily the core platform where we integrate payment methods, and that is stuff that we'll only ever do internally. When it comes to adding in the integrations with e-commerce systems, that's less of a specialist role. So we can go to other companies who specialize, say, in e-commerce, or to more general development organizations to do those implementations first, because they can see our APIs and see the e-commerce APIs and do the integration piece. So there's a reasonable volume of coverage. Again, this kind of comes back to table stakes that I mentioned. There's just certain coverage you have to have, and we can increase the breadth of some of that by outsourcing. It tends to be sort of work that you do up front. It's a fairly big piece of work up front, and then it just slips into fairly quiet maintenance work over future, the occasional bug fix or feature enhancement. Sometimes we need to expand out our resourcing for a while to add in a new integration, and then once it's there, we can support it with our internal resource.
Okay, thank you. Give us any sense of any particular KPIs or SLAs you might focus on when you're working with an outsourcing vendor.
Well, for us, we don't necessarily measure the vendor in that way, because we measure the individual developers instead. Like the developers do become part of the existing team rather than having a piece of work they work on. So the developers will be kind of measured in the normal way in terms of how we assess all the people internally. It's an extension of our normal engineering management function. Again, that's because of how we work. It's not as... We have some work which kind of support work where we can more easily measure that kind of stuff, but we're very engineering focused right now. It makes that kind of ability to do SLA a little bit more difficult.
Okay. And a final question before we talk a bit more detail about your relationship with Devico, with one of your partners. What advice would you give to any CTO or organisation that was kind of just on the edge of starting to consider IT outsourcing?
Well, again, I think there are different types of CTO. It's really ambiguous. It's not like some other kind of C-suite roles. You get people who are very technical, like I come from a development background, I still write code a lot, to people who are a bit almost more like CIOs, but still have the CTO name. For me, I think it comes down to the kind of business you have, like whether it's you're trying to build a relationship with a company, where you need to know these people very well and be able to communicate very well with them. Or is it just a non-critical, like maybe a support function where you can just create the training materials, give the access you need to maybe some internal tooling, and then you can just outsource the whole thing. That's not where we are right now. And that's a model that I think, again, over time, AI will take a chunk of that kind of support work. But you really need to look at your model and see what works for the particular environment that you're in. I think it's something that will kind of change over time. But for me, it's very much about extending the development team.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to move into the final section of our discussion this morning, just into your relationship with Devico. And clearly you will have looked at a number of different partners. There's a lot of people in the space, but I'm initially curious around what were the specific reasons that led you to choose Devico as a partner?
Yeah, so like I said, I've been in this industry for quite a long time. So I used to contract for a long time, and then did some interim CTO work for a private equity firm working on some portfolio company. I've had experience with a lot of different agencies in the past, and have worked on the agency side as well. So I get a feel for different agencies, what their kind of sweet spot is. And I had worked with Devico previously. I just knew I could go, like I'd met Oleg previously on another role. And for the kind of thing that we wanted to do to expand out some of the engineering roles quickly, Devico was a good place to go. Like we wanted people, we just to elaborate the time. Whilst we're remote only, we cover a large area. We've people from India to Chicago, so a lot of time zones. But one thing we've really tried to do is narrow down the engineering focus to kind of plus or minus 2 hours of GMT. Because trying to work with engineers, you need that kind of overlap time to sit down and really discuss things, especially when you're remote. You don't get that natural kind of dissemination of information. Everything has to be kind of planned. It has to be very deliberate. So you need overlap in time. And again, with Oleg being able to find us developers in that time zone really quickly has been really useful for us.
Is there a particular example where you've noticed a change or an improvement within your organisation that's benefited from the partnership with Devico?
Yeah, so Oleg's good. Like he can happily jump on calls with me occasionally and tell me what to do, give me advice on the kind of roles we should be filling or how we should be doing stuff. So it has been useful. We started off with a developer testing mentality that developers kind of test their own work, and we really emphasize that. So as part of the merge request process, we're making sure that the test coverage is there for everything. Because the tests kind of show what else the developer is thinking about or not thinking about. And that works to a point. But as our coverage of different solutions increases, we need to start thinking more about QA. And it's been useful running some stuff by Oleg and the guys at Devico. When you work in that agency capacity, you have the benefit of a greater sample size to see like what works and what doesn't work. Sometimes when all you see is like how you do things, it's sort of a trial and error. You can try something that doesn't work, you can write off that time and that wasted effort later. But it's just good to get someone just saying, look, I've seen this work, I've seen this many times, that pattern fails. And that's something that you only really get from people who've had that breadth of coverage rather than kind of the depth of working in just one company for a long time.
Okay. Are you able to share any insight as well around ultimately the impact on bottom line with regards to the partnership with Devico?
It's quite expensive for us to take people on in the way we do. We used to set up employee of records schemes in different countries for different people. With Devico, it's easier for me to spin up another stream of work and get people involved in it more quickly. We have our agreement with Devico, and the quality of candidates that we get is always good. So we're not kind of wasting time trying to manage that stuff ourselves. We did try some online schemes, I won't mention names, where developers can submit their CVs and you can kind of choose who you want to interview. But it can be really time consuming. We just get hundreds of applicants and it's just too much. With Devico, we got that kind of screening in place. The guys have relationships with these guys, so they'll have seen them on different projects. It just saves us a lot of time. So there's 2 costs. There's probably 3 costs. There's the employee record setup costs. There's my time doing, like, cutting down the number of interviews I have to do. And then there's the headline cost of the developers, like the nearshore developers, been slightly cheaper than if we were to resource the whole team here in London. Most of the company is in the UK, quite a few is around London, so we don't have an office here. But if we were to, the resource costs would be obviously way higher, because then you're competing with the banks not directly for on day to day.
I think one of the things we'd like to pride ourselves at Devico is actually going above and beyond sometimes and going that extra mile as a true partner. You have alluded to lots of strengths, but I just wondered, is there a specific instance that you could recall where you think, actually, those guys went just a little bit further than the normal on this one?
So with Oleg, we have had some issues previously with some contractors, and Oleg's been able to get in there really quickly and sort things out for me, find replacements for things. Because like I said, in an interview, it's difficult when it's completely remote to how people actually behave when they start working with you. Often to the better. Like I say, people often kind of struggle with the remote interviews. But look, where it hasn't worked out, Oleg's been straight in there on a call, talking through what the problems are, what we can do to resolve it, and sorting it out really quickly. And again, he's been pushing us on how we should resource and test some of these things as well. Because as you get bigger and the compliance requirements increase, like having that test resource is really useful. I come from very much the engineering part of it rather than the whole, when it comes to the QA side, it's not something I've had a huge amount of exposure to. I normally working on the platform below all this where people aren't necessarily doing a lot of QA work. It's kind of binary down there, either works or it doesn't. So yeah, it's been really useful getting his take on how we should be looking at resourcing these things in future.
Okay, I think one of the most valuable aspects of these conversations we have with our clients is getting some insight into how we are adding value and getting the opportunity to get some feedback. I just wondered if you could kind of share with us some feedback around what do we need to keep doing to ensure that we're delivering what we need or what you need from us?
I guess the difficulty with agencies, especially software development agencies, is trying to keep that sort of personal feel as you grow. I can jump on a call with Oleg very quickly with fairly short notice. We meet occasionally as he goes on his travels to catch up with his different partners. Trying to scale that is difficult, but I think it's important. Like, going back to the whole AI thing, I think those kind of human relationships are going to be more important than they were in future. And just feel that it is a relationship, and you're not just part of some massive agency's sales cycle that once you're in and they've put some bums on seats for you, that's the last of the communication you have until it comes around to contract renegotiation. We don't have internal resourcers, so in the past that we've done that hiring and interviewing ourselves. But with Devico, it kind of feels that we have a resource who are kind of pushing us on what we should be doing and helping us with that resourcing. And that's an important piece, and something that I think you guys should really try hard to not lose. I think often when it comes to nearshoring to Eastern Europe, that a lot of the mentality is that it's just cheap, get more people in more quickly. And that's where kind of Devico stands out as not just being that impersonal, that they're not just trying to get a team together and leave you. It is building a relationship for like a longer term, like how can we continue to meet your requirements rather than let's just get one project out of the way.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thanks for adding that on as well. I appreciate it. I can't believe that 30 minutes has gone so quickly, actually. It's been really interesting talking to you about FinTech and your product and your organisation, and more importantly, working with Devico. So great to meet you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us this morning, and have a great rest of the day.
No problem. Likewise, Stephen. All the best. Have a good day.